This is the Shift Shapers Podcast, connecting benefits advisors with thought leaders and entrepreneurs who are shaping the shifts in the industry. And now, here's your host, David Saltzman.
One of the things that we all need to be able to do, and it's a constant theme, we've talked about it a few times on the program, is to be able to communicate better. And 80% of communicating is listening. And one of the things we don't do is build our conversations in a way that gives us really great materials to listen to and to understand our prospects and understand our clients. Bear with me for a minute because this will all become muddier as we go along, I'm sure. But we're talking today with Peter Margaritis. Peter defines himself as the accidental accountant, which we'll talk about in a minute. But he wrote this really great book called Improv is No Joke. And the subtitle is maybe more important. It's called Using Improvisation to Create Positive Results in Leadership and Life. And we thought it'd be a fascinating conversation. So welcome, Peter.
Hey, David. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So let's answer the question that I know is on everybody's mind. How does one become an accidental accountant?
Well, I was raised Greek American, so I should be in a restaurant. And actually, that's where I spent most of my youth and through college. But I found my way into the accounting profession, and I was working for Victoria's Secret Catalog, not as a model, David, but I appreciate you thinking that way. And my boss during my review said, how in the heck did you ever become a CPA? CPAs can get down into the detail. I could only get you about this far. You're an accidental accountant. And that was the nicest thing she had said to me all year. And actually, I'd mentioned to her that I was going to trademark that, and I have, registered trademark, as well as name of my business. DBA is doing the accidental accountant.
I just figured that anybody who's worked for Price Waterhouse and Victoria's Secret had to be the kind of person we had to have on the podcast. So let's talk about improv. You know, now that we've kind of established that your background is weird, like most of the people in our business, most of the people who are in the insurance business, especially on the sales side, have come from other places. Very few people start out and, you know, at 12, when mom says, what do you want to be when you grow up? They say, I want to be an insurance person. But they fall into it, and they're great folks, but they need to be able to listen better and to engage in richer conversations. So let's start with a level set, Peter. What is improv?
Improv is, I tell you what, maybe it's better if I tell you what it's not.
Okay.
The reason being is people improv is not about making stuff up. Improv is not flying by the seat of your pants. Improv is about, one, we said it, listening, that active listening, being focused, undistracted, but it's also about being prepared. And that's the part that blows people away. They go, well, why do you guys go to, if you're in an improv troupe, you practice? That seems counterintuitive. No, actually, we practice so we don't get it wrong, but it's still being created on stage without a script. But we've practiced so we can be smoother in that delivery. We can get engage our teammates into the process of what we are creating. And it was recent. My new book, Off Script, Mastering the Art of Business Improv. So it's still really new. I mean, that title, even though I should know it by heart, it's still kind of new to me. But in researching that book, I learned that Martin Luther King improvised the I Have a Dream speech. And it's been written in a number of publications. And long story short, he had scripted that speech out and really was entitled I Have a Dream. The night before the March on Washington, he and his inner circle were crafting his speech. He wanted it to be like the Gettysburg Address. And he had this piece in there called I Have a Dream, but some of his inner circle said, we've been doing that for 9 months. Let's just put something else new in here and do it that way. So he's about 2/3 of the way through the speech on that day, and he looks down and sees these words and knows these words are not holding anything. He's been noticing the crowd not really reacting in the way that he wants them to react. And Mahalia Jackson is a gospel singer who sung that day, who about at that point in time said, Hey, tell him about your dream, Martin. Tell him about your dream. And it's been written that he pushed his script aside and went into the I Have a Dream speech. And that's what people remember. If you look at the video, for 2/3 of his speech, about 17 minutes, he's looking down, looking up, clearly reading. Once he pushed it away, never looked down again, spoke from the heart, and really transformed that speech into something that became very memorable. So that's what improv is what Martin Luther King did.
And yet, when you start in the book pulling apart all the elements that are part of good improv, they're all the things that I think people who are benefits advisors, people who are salespeople, people who are executives or leaders, they all need. You talk about supporting, and I'd like you to kind of wax on this a little bit, but you talk about supporting, respecting, trusting, listening, focusing, and adapting. I think those are the keys for human communication. So yes. How do those also work in an improv setting? How do you bring those to bear?
Well, in order to be an effective improviser, and whether you're in a scene or at work, one, you have to have that baseline of respect, trust, and support. You have to respect the people that you're with. You may not like them all, but you have to respect them, trust that they've got your back, and you've got their back through that support system. But it comes down to listening and those two magic words, yes and. No and but are defensive words, and they stop conversation. Yes and pushes conversation forward. So in an improvised scene, if you're not paying attention and somebody delivers a line, okay, you get nothing to respond to because you weren't focused and listening. Or even from an object setup, if you've said that this is a table over here, and now clearly it's invisible, but that's what it is. And if you're not paying attention and focus, and you walk through that table, the audience sees it and realizes you're not paying attention. So they all work together. And I many years ago, I was doing stand-up, clearly not that great. That's why I fell in love with improv. But I walked out of my first improv class, second improv class, where this is more about than being funny. This is a true communication tool that is not getting the respect that it should be in the business community. And that was 20-some-odd years ago.
So one of the other things you talk about, and I want to get back to the yes and maybe have you give us some examples, but you talk about the concept of group mind. When you talk about group mind, what do you mean, and why does that matter?
David, let me ask you a question. Are you married?
Was. And for how many years? 37.
37. So you and your spouse could be at a party, at the opposite side of the room of each other, look at each other, and know exactly what you're thinking.
All the time.
That's the group. All the time. So that group mind is when the teams have been able to spend a lot of time together, been able to gel together. The Chicago Bears, when they won the Super Bowl, they equated that to the group mind because everybody knew what everybody was supposed to do. They've been working together for a number of years, and they were able to execute at that highest level. Now, that becomes a bigger challenge in corporate America today when teams are put together and torn apart, put together and torn apart. We got free agency in sports. It takes a while to get that to gel. But that is the ultimate pinnacle of improv, is being with an ensemble that you have that group mind mentality.
So is one of the tools of using that group mind mentality to your benefit the listening with your eyes that you talk about in the book?
Yes. The ability to communicate without using words with your team, the ability to be able to adapt on a dime without really having that much thought, because I know what everybody else is going to do. I've been working with for a while. I know their likes and dislikes, and I'm not going to deliver something that they might not. And that just becomes powerful when you have that type of respect and trust for each other.
So how does the whole yes and thing factor into a business discussion without you sounding like a loon?
Well, it's a yes and philosophy, but really as I have an improv coach. I've had him on retainer for about a couple of years. And I remember him telling to me once, he goes, you know what, Pete, you have an infinite number of yeses in life, but you don't have that infinite number of no's. And at some point, one of those no's, you'll lose a relationship, you'll get fired, something will fall apart. So the more that we can say yes, agree, and let's add on to it in a positive way, we solve problems a lot quicker. And we're able to deal with change a lot easier when we keep that mentality. But we also have that fear. of change, that fear of doing something different. And it's the ability to get people to buy into the fact, lean into it. It's okay to fail. It's okay to make a mistake. I read an article on psychological safety, and that in itself is improv. And a culture and environment that you can speak your mind, you can tell me what you think, and you won't be punished for it. Or you have that freedom to speak your mind, and it won't cost you your job.
So if I'm talking to a prospect, and I'll put it in insurance benefits parlance because that's who most of our audience is, if I'm speaking to a prospect and they say something and they're kind of on the right track, but they're not kind of like really where I want them to be, can I use yes and as a bridge to move them from where they are to amplify and say yes and if we do that, or yes and the best way to accomplish that is?
Bingo.
Is it a good mechanism for what politicians, when they're in interviews, know as bridging?
Always bridging, yes. Yes and is a bridge. And it's to really close that gap and get away from saying yes but or no because. Being a CPA, CPAs are notorious for saying no. And most organizations have that executive in the C-suite, and that person is the CF no, as interpreted by other departments, because there's always here and there. Say yes, and let's add on to it. It's yes, and's about agreement, but not always agreeing. It's actually you're telling the person who's talking with you that you're going to listen to what they have to say. You're going to park your ego and your agenda, and you're going to actively listen to them, and then when they're done, add on to that conversation, not tear it down. Move it in a positive way, and that's powerful.
So you could say, can I write off my bar tab? Your answer would be yes, and the good news is the 3 years you spend in prison will give you plenty of time to write that book you've been meaning to write.
Absolutely. Or we can write off that bar tab, yes, and we are talking business, and that qualifies as a tax deduction as much as I remember from the tax code, and let's order another round.
One of the things that salespeople, advisors have a problem with oftentimes is when the conversation kind of takes a quick right turn or a quick left turn that they weren't expecting. Being fluent in yes and, we'll call it for the moment, does that help you ready yourself for something that's unexpected and be able to go with the flow in a better way than if you didn't have that yes and mindset? Yes.
And what improvisers do is we are scripted. I mean, we are scripted beforehand. We're working through, so I'm working through my presentation. I've got it laid out. Know what I'm going to do. However, when I walk into that room, I wad that script up in my mind and throw it away. Absolutely throw it away. And just spend that time reading the audience, engaging with the audience, and when they take me down another path, so I can go off script and explore that with them, or explore that rejection with them, or explore that thought process with them, all the while knowing that I still need to bring them back to some point, but I'm able to entertain that. And a lot of it really has to do with getting rid of distractions, those internal distractions, that self-talk in our head, or, okay, if he says, she says this, I've got this to counter. If he says this, I got this to counter. Throw it away. Just have that conversation. And because when we're scripted, we're really not listening to the other party. We're reading that script in our head, and we're not actively listening to the information that's coming to us from them.
Yeah, somebody said we tend to listen to reply, not to listen to understand.
Right. And or listen to interrupt.
So is that what the new book is about? Off Script is the name of the new book. Is that what the new book is about?
Yes. It's when I wrote that first book, I had a number of people say, hey, I really like that book a lot. Now write it for business. And the pandemic hit, and I went, this might be the right time to write it for business. And I just, I've been, for the last 4 or 5 years, I've also been researching the aspect from a business perspective, even though that I've applied it in my business and in my perspective. But there's been more written in the Wall Street Journal, Harvard Business Review, Forbes magazine. There's more books that have come out about how to apply it in the business world. YouTube videos, TED Talk videos. I've got curated about 65 articles that improv in some way, shape, or form is being discussed there as a business tool. And the more that we can create a culture within the organization that is embracing, that is collaborative, that is respectful, and has appreciation for their people and treats them well, and allows them to make mistakes and not punishing them, that's an empowered workforce. That's an empowered organization versus the way was when I grew up in corporate America. I'm going to tell you what to do. Oh, and by the way, you work for Price Waterhouse, you will wear a blue suit, white shirt, red tie. And I remember one day I came in with a black suit, white shirt, I don't know what color tie it was, and they thought I was going to a funeral. And I said, no, this is what I'm working in today. And you would have thought I gave somebody the finger.
Wow. If the people who are listening, if our audience wants to start working on how to get into that yes and mindset, are there things that they should be doing or could be doing to help them move along and become empowered themselves?
When I first started getting into this whole improv concept that it's a communication tool, I had index cards in the bathroom, in my office, in my car, with the two words, yes, and. To this day, I had these made, and it's a yes, and kind of one of those plastic, a number of these. When I do my presentations, I wear a French cuff shirt, not because I think it's fancy stuff, but I got cufflinks that say yes, and. My wife wanted me to get a pair that says yes, dear. Yes, and I still keep it in front of me all the time. I think about it, that how I'm answering this. Is it coming across in a positive way or is it a negative way? And if I feel like it's going to be negative, how can I restructure that into a positive yes, and let's explore this, because we all have egos, and my ego used to be out of control until I realized it was out of control, and I dialed it back, and I continue to dial it back. And the thing about improv is I want to be surrounded with the smarter people than myself. I want to be surrounded with people that I can trust and we can collaborate, that they don't feel like they have to act differently just because I might have to be the owner of the company or the boss, that they can just be themselves and tell me what they think, because that's why I hired them. I want to know what they think, even though it might be a little crazy at times, but crazy is good. Crazy gives us bandwidth to create. We might not do the crazy, but we can find some in between. It's just, I don't know, it's a lot more fun working in that type of environment.
Well, and that great philosopher James Buffett said, if we weren't all crazy, we'd go insane. So there's that too.
Yes.
If you become a practitioner and you really get good at this, I suspect, correct me if I'm wrong, does it not also make you more nimble in situations that maybe you didn't expect, both in business and in your personal life?
Absolutely. You become extremely nimble. Things don't upset you like they used to. The other thing about improv is we focus on things that we have control over, not on things that we don't have control over. And after about the third or fourth day of the pandemic back in March, I went, Pete, you're focusing on the wrong thing. What can you control? You can control being safe with your health, and you've just been given a gift of time, because speaking engagements were just flying right out the door. I mean, they were not, but gave me the gift of time that I was able to think about my business, retool my business, write a book, and just try to not get too far ahead. And you know what? I don't want to go back to what it used to be. I don't want to go back to smelling mimeograph paper. I don't want to go back to where cars didn't have blind spot indicators or park themselves. I still want to keep moving forward. And whatever this new normal is, I'm embracing it. And it also helps with my stress level, too.
And you can Google mimeograph for those of you who aren't quite the vintage that Pete and I are. And to be honest with you, back in the 70s, we were smelling mimeograph paper for a whole other reason. But that's a different show altogether.
Yeah.
Pete, great book. It's called Improv is No Joke. It's available wherever you get your books. Grab a copy and a copy of his new book called Off Script. Pete, thanks so much for sharing your expertise with our audience today.
David, thank you very much. This was an absolute blast.
My pleasure, sir.